Now let's talk about the body's joints. Synovial joints are the freely mobile joints in which the articulating surfaces have no direct contact with each other. The ball and socket. With a ball-shaped surface of one rounded bone fitting into the cup-like depression of another, it permits free movement in numerous axes, for example, the hip joint. Then there is the condyloid joint. This contains a convex surface which articulates with a concave ellipticoid cavity. These are also known as ellipsoid joints. For example, metacarpal phalangeal joint, or the wrist joints. Next, we also have the gliding plane. The gliding plane is the articulate surfaces are relatively flat, allowing the bones to glide over one another. Examples would be the acromialo-clavicular joint and the subpular joint. Now, the hinge joint prevents movements in one place, usually flexion and extension. For example, the elbow joint or the knee joint. The pivot joint allows for rotation only if it is formed by a central bony pivot. For example, proximal and distal radial ulnar joints. And the saddle, named due to its resemblance to a saddle on a horse's back. It is characterized by opposing articular surfaces with a reciprocal concave convex shape. For example, carpal metacarpal joints. Bones rotate around a joint in a plane that is perpendicular to an axis of rotation. An axis of rotation is an imaginary line that projects through the pivot or rotational point on a joint. In the frontal plane, the AP axis or anterior-posterior, an imaginary line running from the anterior to posterior and perpendicular to the frontal plane. There is also the sagittal plane, in which the ML axis, or the mid-lateral or transverse, an imaginary line running from the left to the right and perpendicular to the sagittal plane. Then there is the horizontal plane. The longitude axis, an imaginary line running from the top to bottom and perpendicular to the transverse plane. Sagittal plane rotations occur above a medial lateral or ML axis. Frontal plane rotations occur around an anterior-posterior or AP axis, and transverse plane rotations occur around a longitudinal axis. The shoulder, for example, allows movement in all three planes and therefore has three axes of rotation. In the elbow example, the forearm moves in the sagittal plane of motion as the elbow joint flexes and extends. Because flexion and extension occur in an anterior and posterior direction respectively, the axis of rotation is perpendicular to it and projects through the joint in a middle lateral or side-to-side direction. Hence, for the elbow movement occurs in the sagittal plane as flexion and extension around a medial lateral axis of rotation.